Spider-Man No Way Home is promising a villain roster that's sure to rival even Spider-Man 3's clumsy party, but hopefully with more grace. But no, not that type of grace. We will be spoiling the Sam Raimi and Marc Webb Spider-Man movies, so with that said, let's jump right in.
Crazy scientist turns himself into some kind of a monster. 4 mechanical arms welded right onto his body. Guy named Otto Octavius winds up with 8 limbs. What are the odds?
The last time we saw Alfred Molina as Dr. Otto Octavius was in Spider-Man 2, where a fusion reactor demonstration gone wrong caused an AI mechanical arm harness to fuse to Dr. Octavius's body and influence his thinking. After delivering Spider-Man to a vengeful Harry Osborn and rebuilding his fusion reactor to even more dangerous results, Peter short-circuits Otto's arms, rendering them useless. When Peter reveals himself as Spider-Man to Doc Ock and reminds him about what Otto had said about using intelligence for good, Doc Ock takes control of his mechanical arms and Casino Royales himself with the reactor in a heroic yet definite death. With that in mind, we're very curious to see how he's still alive in Spider-Man No Way Home.
Hello, Peter.
However, for all we know, the Doc Ock we see in No Way Home could actually be Agatha Harkness, played by Kathryn Hahn, who coincidentally voiced a female Doc Ock in Into the Spider-Verse in disguise, bringing both of Hahn's devious villains together.
This is fascinating.
If Doctor Strange is using magic, what's to say that Agatha hadn't found a way out of Wanda's imprisonment, right? She also could have made Ralph Bohner into Green Goblin, who knows? Okay, that theory is just for me, but I'm rooting for Evan Peters to be the only actor to actually traverse the Marvel Cinematic Universes. Aside from himself, Peter Parker's main nemesis is the Green Goblin. Featured as a bad guy in the prior 2 Spider-Man franchises, we've had Willem Dafoe, James Franco, and Dane DeHaan all take a ride on the glider. At the end of the first Spider-Man, Willem Dafoe's manic Norman Osborn met this grisly fate.
Oh.
When Peter brings Norman back to the Osborn penthouse and laid him on the Chase Lounge, Harry sees this and swears vengeance on this bug. After finding out Peter is Spider-Man, he sees his father in the mirror because he lives within him or something, and tells Harry,
Avenge me.
Harry discovers Norman's secret goblin lair and takes on the mantle purely for revenge against the web-slinger. In Spider-Man 3, Harry starts micro-misting with the formula that turned his dad crazy, working on a sleeker, snowboardier costume to attack Spider-Man in. After nearly dying from head trauma, Harry lost his short-term memory, but he gets it back with the help of good old dad and makes Mary Jane break up with Peter in an attempt to break him from the inside. He then delivers this incredible eating grin with IGN's own Clint Gage reading a newspaper right behind him. You see him right there? However, he decides to help Peter when Mary Jane is kidnapped and sacrifices himself to protect his best friend. Okay, now quickly jumping to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Dane DeHaan plays a Harry Osborn who, as a childhood friend of Peter, was sent away to a boarding school at 11 years old. They reconnect when Norman passes away from retroviral hyperplasia, something Norman reveals to Harry is genetic. Now armed with all the research Norman did into their disease and true deductive reasoning to know that Spider-Man was bit by Richard Parker's spiders and became superhuman, Harry asks Peter to ask Spider-Man for his blood in hopes that it may be the key to curing his disease. After Spider-Man says no, Harry learns from his new assistant Felicia, whose own villainous turn as Black Cat is never fulfilled, that before the spiders were destroyed to wash Oscorp's hands clean of Dr. Connor's work, which we'll get to later, their venom was extracted and secretly stored away. After being framed by Oscorp's board of directors for Max Dillon's unfortunate accident, which we will also get to after this, Harry goes to Ravencroft to team up with Electro and get revenge on Spider-Man. After being injected with the spider venom, which we learn is infused with Parker DNA, Harry turns into a literal goblin-looking figure and boards his glider for a final transformation. Harry then does what every great/standard Spider-Man villain does and threatens Peter's love interest. His and Peter's tussle ends anticlimactically for Harry as he ends up knocked unconscious under a pile of pipes while Gwen sadly falls to her death. The last time we see DeHaan's Harry is when he gets a visit from Gustav Fiers, aka the Gentleman, updating him on the formation of what could possibly be the Sinister Six.
Who are you?
Don't you know? I'm Electro.
Jamie Foxx's Electro, aka Max Dillon, is an electrical engineer at Oscorp who, 1, does not own a blueprint carrier, and 2, becomes obsessed with Spider-Man after he saves Dillon's life. After being forced to work late on his birthday and falling into a vat of eels, he becomes Power. Serious note, the world of Spider-Man New York City is full of negligent workers at every dangerous lab, and that should be investigated, I think. After a confrontation with Spider-Man and the NYPD goes south, Dylan ends up in Ravencroft, where of course a sadistic German Dr. Kafka revels in having a new patient to work with.
I'm here to study you, to understand what you are, why you are, and I will get results.
After Harry asks for Dylan's help and promises him access to the grid he helped design, Electro fights Spider-Man but is now defeated by freaking magnets and is zapped out of existence.
Rhino! I told you I would be back!
Now, we don't get too much of Paul Giamatti's Alexei Sitsevich in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but it sure seems like we'll get him again in Spider-Man No Way Home, which is a blessing because, first off, what inspired casting? After hijacking an Oscorp truck full of plutonium-238 and being caught with his pants down, we don't see him again until after the gentleman updates Harry on the progress of a certain small group of assembled villains. Now operating a Rhino suit, Spider-Man suits up again after a painful 5 months of mourning Gwen Stacy's death, and about to take on this low-level criminal. We never actually see the outcome of this fight, so maybe we might see this play out in No Way Home. Again, another plotline about the mystery of Richard Parker that was unfortunately left as a loose end. Okay, now we're back to Raimi's Spider-Man 3. In Spider-Man 3, Thomas Hayden Church plays Flint Marco, aka Sandman, aka the actual accidental Uncle Ben shooter. After breaking out of Rikers and promising to find money to get his daughter better, he changes into a green striped shirt and is chased by the police. He casually climbs the fence to a property where particle physics are being tested and ends up in a sand pit where negligent scientists turn him into Sandman. He wills himself into control over the sand and quickly gains control over convenient sand trucks throughout the city. After being turned into wet sand, he runs into Eddie Brock and Venom and they team up. However, he didn't want any of this, and after revealing that he's regretted the shooting every single day since, Peter forgives him and lets him drift off like dust in the wind.
I want to kill the spider. You want to kill the spider. Together, he doesn't stand a chance.
Interested?
Across the various live-action Spider-Man cinematic universes, again we have two different Venoms. Raimi's Venom, who infected both Peter and Eddie Brock, and the current iteration of the symbiote played by Tom Hardy. The Venom of Spider-Man 3 crash lands onto Earth with no background information and infects Peter, amplifying all of his awful characteristics. He becomes an emo jerk to everyone around him, and we all know how that song and dance goes.
Now dig on this.
Eddie Brock Jr. is Gwen Stacy's boyfriend / maybe just one-time date, and Peter's professional rival. After Venom Peter ruins Eddie's career, Eddie comes across Peter trying to extricate himself from the symbiote and then becomes the latest host. He kidnaps Mary Jane and draws Spider-Man out for a fight. When Peter uses the two symbiote weaknesses, the first one being sound, to pull Eddie out of Venom and throws a Goblin grenade to blow him up, Eddie jumps back into the loving arms of Venom and they both perish. In the post-credits scene of Venom Let There Be Carnage, Venom, who is a fully realized character all on his own, and Eddie Brock are mysteriously transported to the MCU, as maybe evidenced by this super dark shot that some people think looks a lot like Venom.
Poor Peter Parker. No mother. No father. No uncle.
Alright, are you still with me? We're gonna go back to the first Amazing Spider-Man movie where Dr. Curt Connors is a scientist who worked with Peter's father at Oscorp. As a herpetologist who wants a world without weakness, yikes, Dr. Connors wants to study something more radical than stem cells. Cross-species genetics, all with the aim to save a dying Norman Osborn, as well as to grow back his own arm. In an attempt to stop Dr. Ratha from using the lizard serum and performing covert human trials on veterans, Connors becomes the first human trial and wakes up with a brand new arm and hand, which is frankly disgusting looking. After he attacks Dr. Ratha on the bridge in his full lizard form, he finds that the serum is not permanent and continues his research in the sewers, because why not? In his lab, Connors realizes that he could use this lizard serum to cure all sorts of diseases, but will also turn test mice into lizard hybrids, which is haunting. During a tetanus-filled fight in said sewers, Dr. Connors discovers that Peter Parker is Spider-Man and immediately decides to attack him during school hours. Peter eventually discovers that Dr. Connors wants to use the lizard serum on New York City and races to Oscorp to stop him. Connors makes it to the top of Oscorp Tower and loads the Ganali antigen device with the lizard serum. He and Peter duke it out on the tower, and with the help of Captain Stacy, aka Willem Dafoe's doppelganger, they freeze Dr. Connors' limbs with liquid nitrogen. However, he regrows his limbs and kills Captain Stacy. Peter manages to replace the serum with the antidote in time, and the antigen cloud turns Dr. Connors and the city back to normal. Dr. Connors manages to pull Peter up after destroying his web shooters during the fight and says goodbye to his arm for good. But the literal last time we see Dr. Connors is when the gentleman visits him at Rikers and asks him if he told Peter about his father, and Dr. Connors warns that the gentleman should leave Peter alone. Side note, yes, there is a Dr. Connors in the Raimi movies, but he's just Peter's professor who basically says, do or do not, there is no try when it comes to class attendance. He also says, damn it Peter, I'm a physicist, not a biologist, so he's really just a nerd quote mouthpiece in those movies.
Who is Spider-Man? He's a criminal, that's who he is. A vigilante.
That's right, of all the Spider-Man villains we've seen, we're ultimately just waiting for more of J.K. Simmons' J. Jonah Jameson. In Raimi's trilogy, Jameson launched a smear campaign against Spider-Man and reveled in the hero's retirement, but ultimately respects the hero for what he's done for the city. That is until Spider-Man steals back his own suit.
He was a thief! A criminal!
The last time we physically see Jameson in the Raimi movies, he's watching Spider-Man fight Venom and Sandman and wearing a coat that looks very familiar. And while we don't see him in the Marc Webb movies, he does get a name check in The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Well, Jameson pays me a fair wage if it was 1961.
However, audiences were given a treat when Simmons made a cameo in the Spider-Man Far From Home post-credits. As J. Jonah Jameson, an Alex Jones-type news host and editor of the controversial Daily Bugle website, he kicks off all of Peter's troubles in No Way Home, outing him as Spider-Man and a killer. Whether he is the same newsman from Raimi's movies or is an iteration with the same face, we need to know how and if Simmons is around to stay.
Tomorrow morning, Spider-Man, page 1 with a decent picture this time.
And that's where we last left off with our Spider-Man villains across the different cinematic universes. For the most part, a lot of them are dead, so we'll have to see what Doctor Strange's magic and the multiverse did to conjure these villains from the dead. For more on Spider-Man and bad guys, be sure to follow and subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Dr. Otto Octavius.
Wait, no, seriously, what's your actual name?